something. The last national poll was the Emerson poll, came out on Saturday, that has Joe Biden up by 4 points. And its methodological note reads, the July National Emerson College Next Star Media Poll was conducted July 29 to 30. The sample consisted of likely Dem, Republican, Independent voters and 964 people with a credibility interval similar to a poll's margin error of plus or minus 3.1. Data sets were weighted by gender, age, education, party affiliation, race, and religion and region based on 2016 voter turnout modeling. It's important to remember that subsets based on gender, age, party breakdown, ethnicity, and region carry with them higher margins of error as the sample size is reduced. Data was collected using an interactive voice response system of landlines, 532, and an online panel provided by MTurk, 432. Would you translate that, Steve Kornaki?
Well, yeah, Emerson University, which has been doing some polling, they did it in the Democratic primary season as well. You mentioned at the end there, the online panel, they have that sort of internet component of it. And I think one of the possible criticisms, I guess, and you saw this in the Democratic primaries, is are they getting too many young people? Are they getting too many people with college degrees? If you looked at their Democratic primary polling, they were probably the most favorable outlet to Bernie Sanders, just in terms of the results that they kept reporting out. And that was one of the possible reasons that was offered for it. Were they getting too many young people? So how that translates exactly into the general election polling, I mean, again, it's possible the same issues apply. They do have that live component of it as well now, though. You have their national poll. I think they put it at 4 right now, Biden versus Trump. I always say just whatever the individual poll is, look at the average. The average, I think, right now, is about 7 points. So it's, it's on the lower end of what's out there right now.
Is it closing, in your opinion, Steve Kornaki?
I think remains to be seen. We're in a bit of it. We got some new state polling yesterday. I think we need another kind of batch of brand name, kind of gold standard national polls. As I say, the average right now sitting at 7. It's been as high as about 9.2, 9.3, something like that. So the average is down a little bit from there. That drop does not include any new, sort of brand name. I'm talking, NBC, Wall Street Journal, that kind of thing, in the last couple of weeks. So I'd say let's get a couple more of those out there nationally, see if those are putting it more at 5, 6, 7 than 8, 9, 10. And if so, then say it's dropping. But I'd say right now, you don't have enough data out there to say.
Now, I want to ask you about what you think public opinion is about the virus. And the backdrop is this. I wrote a column for the Washington Post. I've been writing columns for 30 years, Steve. I've never had a reaction that was as loud, voluminous, and divided, both pro and con, than this column, which is, one of my friends said it's anodyne. It's really just a listing of Trump accomplishments, but it just provoked this enormous response in terms of comments, retweets, replies, the whole online social buzz from the world of online media. I think it's because we're finally coming to grips with the election, people's attention turning to it, and the response most often to my listing of his accomplishments is he's responsible for 150,000 dead Americans. Now, I know that that's rhetorical. Do people believe that in polling?
That becomes a partisan question, in polling when you go to that level. But I think if you take a step back from there, I mean, the polling has been pretty consistent on this and remains so. Assessment of Trump's overall job performance on the coronavirus, it remains very, very upside down, a lot more negative than positive. And that's been consistent. Our most recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll, again, it's a couple weeks old now, but we've been seeing this in poll after poll. Low 30s approval on coronavirus, high 50s, really 60% disapproval on his performance there. As long as I have felt, as long as that negative assessment stands, it's very hard to see him competing and winning the presidential election. I think he needs to narrow that gap. It's just obviously the most pressing issue by far in the country. When you're the president, you got to have a better polling profile on that issue.
Now, I had a good friend, a medical technologist, call me last night from the great state of Ohio saying, this is like Carter in 80. He's trapped in the Rose Garden with a daily toll going up that he has to attack, unlike Carter who allowed it to happen to him, Trump has to attack that 155,000, 157,000 number, which is a grievous toll, but he also has to make an argument. It's not my toll. It's the Chinese Communist Party's toll, and the responsibility for it is shared among every elected official in the country. Does that argument have legs? Do governors? I also heard it put by a different person. Every single elected official at every level, from school board to president, is suffering because of COVID. Do you agree with that, Steve Kornaki?
Yeah, although I'll tell you, it's the state that has had the worst, just statistically, if you look at the worst outcome, it's New York State. It's 33,000 dead in New York State and in the New York metro area, New York and New Jersey. And if you look at the polling on Andrew Cuomo and his performance among New Yorkers, it's in the 60s approval. If you go a step below that, if you look at De Blasio, New York City, if you look at his approval rating on it, it's also high. It's also positive. If you look at Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, those are high numbers there. And those are states that have had, again, just statistically, if you look at the outcome and fatalities, if you look at the scale of the outbreak, if you look at everything they've been through, they've had it worse than anybody else. They've had it worse than anybody else who's got one that's raging right now. So that's surprised me a bit. I live in New York, as I hear in New York, but that has surprised me a bit.
Well, I think is part of that because Cuomo's good on TV.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's an element of this. When you're the leader, when you command the media attention that the governor of a state like New York does, that the president of the United States does, when you have daily press conferences, when you get an hour every day and you're able to, I think what Cuomo clearly did, I think even his detractors would concede this, is he conveyed a tone of seriousness. He conveyed a tone of sort of an aggressive approach to this. Again, I'm not getting into the nitty gritty of the actual approach here, but the tone that came through on television day after day in those briefings, I do think that had something to do with it. And to be honest, I do think as well, there is a polarization aspect to this. If there's a Democratic public official out there, they're going to benefit from pretty strong support among Democrats right now, just because they don't want to be against the Democrat.
And I personally do not blame Cuomo for the nursing home fiasco. I just think people are nuts to blame anyone for it. No one wants Americans to die, but it is polarized. Last question on the polling. Karen Bass was on with Chuck Todd yesterday, had a pretty rough go of it on Cuba. And there's a Washington Post story today that Joe Biden is blowing the vice presidential pick. He's let it go on too long, and it's got Kamala Harris versus Karen Bass versus Val Demings versus Stephanie Abrams. What do you think about this, and does it matter?
Yeah, it's always the question, right? Does it matter? I always remember, I think the biggest mismatch, just again, in terms of if you look at the polling on the vice presidential candidates, it was Lloyd Bentsen against Dan Quayle back in '88. That's when Benson, got off that zinger at the debate, Jack Kennedy. Benson still lost his home state by 21 points. The Dukakis-Benson ticket still lost 40 states. So if a mismatch of that degree in favor of one ticket couldn't budge anything, I don't know that the vice presidential pick matters that much electorally. But I think that the thing here, obviously, we always say is this one matters so much more because Joe Biden is 78 on day one if he gets elected. And you have a president coming in there who there is just a wide assumption would be a one-term president. There'd be an open Democratic nomination in 2024. You would be giving a leg up to this pick on a scale that a normal vice presidential pick just doesn't have. So from that standpoint, this is a supremely important pick. But I have a hard time. I'm looking at them. I could see an issue there clearly for Bass in Florida. Biden's got a significant lead in the Florida polling right now, but that seems like the kind of issue that could hurt him there. But I'm hard-pressed to find too many examples of a VP candidate, no matter how good or bad, doing much good or bad for a ticket.
Well, an African-American woman has the single advantage that stands out of turnout in Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit, the three swing states. Of those three candidates, does any one of them have a particular advantage in juicing turnout, in your view, Steve Kornaki?
I haven't seen it yet. I think that's an interesting open question. I mean, here's the stat. It's African-American turnout in presidential elections, right? Go back to 2004, it was 59%. Go to Obama in 08 and 12, 66, 67%. That's the jump. That's the huge African-American turnout jump that Obama generated, Democrats benefited from. Clinton in 16, it was back down basically to 59%. I think it's an open question. Do you put an African-American on number 2 on the ticket? Does that have the same effect as having an Obama at the top of the ticket? Does a Kamala Harris, just in terms of personality, have the same effect as Obama? It's not historic anymore in the same way. I'm not sure. It's an open question to me what that does turnout-wise.
It really does. It is one of the